Thank you. I'm happy this evening to introduce my dear colleague, Margaret Atwood. I first met Ms. Atwood many years ago at an international writers' conference in Lahti, Finland. The Finns stage their conferences in June during the 1 week a year that the sun comes out. But this year it did not, and it rained and the Finns became even gloomier and more depressed than usual. As a sympathetic guest from another northern country, Ms. Atwood consoled them with a brilliant talk in which she implied that every place in the world has its problems and that perhaps the sun was the least of theirs. And speaking of her own country by way of example, she said, "If the American national question is who am I, the Canadian national question is, where is here?" And the Finns, living upstairs over another superstate known then as the USSR, well appreciated her sly analogy, and they laughed uproariously. Yet, if you think about it, the where is here question is just what poets and writers going about their work in any land manage to answer whether they would or not. Poets and novelists charge the world with meaning, and when they're through, the where is here turns out to be another strand along with the who am I, as in a double helix, which I'm sure you know is the architecture of DNA. The who am I twined around the where is here is the DNA of literature, and the two questions being inextricable and the beginning of all literary enterprise. One proof of this is that the Finns are remarkable poets. Another is that in the past 50 years or so, Canada has become a source of world-class literature through the work of Miss Atwood and her contemporaries Alice Munro, Carol Shields, Robertson Davies, and Michael Ondaatje, among others. And living upstairs of another superstate, the Canadians have written Canada into the world, and now we all know where here is. You probably know Miss Atwood as a novelist and short story writer, yet she began as a poet. She is still a poet, and being a poet, 15 or more published volumes, her most recent selected poems published in 1995, I believe. She's able to write wonderful prose. It's a theory of mine that the poets, being at the top of the literary pyramid, can write to any level below. And those of you who are strictly writers of fiction or drama can compensate by reading as much poetry as you can. That is the way to feel the heft of words and the rhythms and sounds of language and the power of images, and all these things are taught by poetry. In any event, there is now a Margaret Atwood Society that is busily devoted to the study of her work. Knowing Ms. Atwood, I am sure she regards this attention as a threat to her survival. You cannot be made self-conscious and find out too well what you're doing if you're to go on and turn out such consistently notable fiction as The Handmaid's Tale, The Robber Bride, Alias Grace, and most recently The Blind Assassin, a winner of the Booker Prize. Her just published book about writing and what happens to the people who do it, originally delivered in Cambridge as the Empson Lectures, is called Negotiating with the Dead. It's a very smart book, and if you're interested in writing and seeing what writers read, and why would you be here if you weren't, I advise you to get hold of a copy. Ms. Atwood has taught at universities in Canada, Australia, and the United States, and has served as president of the Writers' Union of Canada and the Canadian PEN. She's traveled all over the world, even to Afghanistan before the Russians got there, and having thereby exhausted the more glamorous global settings, has come now to have a look at the Hamptons. It's sand dunes, it's potato fields, and it's writing students. She has a keen eye that misses little, but she's not without compassion. Margaret Atwood.
It's a great pleasure to be here and to see old friends, and we would hope make new ones, and see writers who've been around for a while, and see others who will shortly hit the, I will not say the fan, who will shortly hit the scene. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. During that very same trip to Finland, Mr. Dr. O delivered himself of the following piece of wisdom, which I've always remembered. He said, "They're not like us." And this was right, because as a Finnish person explained to me, the difference between American people and Finnish people is that American people do not believe you if you get very drunk and then express yourself of emotions, and then express your emotions. They don't believe you. They say, well, he was just drunk. Whereas in Finland, it's the other way around. If you express emotion when you're sober, they don't believe you. And it is necessary, if you want to do something really important, such as proposing to a woman, you must be very, very drunk, or she will think that you are insincere. And that is an important difference, which I hope you'll all remember when you go to Finland. And the other important thing to remember is that in Finland, inside the sauna, they have special sausages, which are sauna sausages, and if you go in there, you will be expected to eat them. So do not do this thing. I'm telling you now. And I think I was supposed to, I think you were quite serious. And I hope people won't think that I have great, huge gobs of wisdom to deliver. Because usually those things are elsewhere. They're on pages. They're written down. If there is any, it's there. But I thought, what can I do that will sound kind of like that? Kind of as if I'm talking about writing. A thing I've always found quite difficult to do. In negotiating with the dead, you'll see why this is. And the reason it is that way is that you can never meet a writer. You can never actually meet the person who has written the book you've just read. Because by the time you have read that book, that writer is a different age and writing something else. So the person that you meet, the person who shares the body, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde person, is never the writer of the book that you have read. And therefore what you're seeing before you is a reasonable facsimile. It's not actually, I'm not who you think I am. And that was what the famous Laura is apparently said to Petrarch. Petrarch, I am not who you think I am. So I thought I would read some pieces that I have written which have to do with writing. And some of them are from this book called Good Bones and Simple Murders. And some of them are, they're all short. Some of them are about how stories could be seen from a different point of view. And every time you read a character in a novel, there is another way of looking at that series of events. This one is called Gertrude Talks Back. You remember Hamlet. His mother is Gertrude. She doesn't actually get to say much in that play. You may have noticed that. My new theory is that Hamlet is about bad parenting. That every single person in that book is a bad parent. Every parent is a bad parent, including the ghost who appears right at the beginning, Hamlet's father. What does he say? He doesn't say, Hamlet, I've always loved you, I'm proud of you. I hope you will have a wonderful career and a lovely life. Instead he says, me, 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 me. Do something about it, I'm dead. His mother is a bad mother, his stepfather is a bad stepfather, and Polonius is a bad parent to both of his children. So now you know. Gertrude talks back. I always thought it was a mistake calling you Hamlet. I mean, what kind of name is that for a young boy? It was your father's idea. Nothing would do but that you had to be called after him. Selfish. The other kids at school used to tease the life out of you. The nicknames and those terrible jokes about pork. I wanted to call you George. I am not wringing my hands. I'm drying my nails. Darling, please stop fidgeting with my mirror. That'll be the third one you've broken. Yes, I've seen those pictures, thank you very much. I know your father was handsomer than Claudius. High brow, aquiline nose, and so on. Looked great in uniform. But handsome isn't everything, especially in a man. And far be it from me to speak ill of the dead, but I think it's about time I pointed out to you that your dad just wasn't a whole lot of fun. Noble, sure, I grant you, but Claudius, well, he likes a drink now and then. He appreciates a decent meal. He enjoys a laugh, know what I mean? You don't always have to be tiptoeing around because of some holier-than-thou principle or something. By the way, darling, I wish you wouldn't call your stepdad the Bloat King. He does have a slight weight problem, and it hurts his feelings. The rank sweat of a what? My bed is certainly not enseamed, whatever that might be. A nasty sty indeed. Not that it's any of your business, but I change those sheets twice a week, which is more than you do, judging from that student slum pig pen in Wittenberg. I'll certainly never visit you there again without prior warning. I see that laundry of yours when you bring it home, and not often enough either by a long shot. Only when you run out of black socks. And let me tell you, everyone sweats at a time like that, as you'd find out very soon if you ever gave it a try. A real girlfriend would do you a heap of good. Not like that pasty-faced what's-her-name, all trussed up like a prize turkey in those touch-me-not corsets of hers. If you ask me, there's something off about that girl. Borderline. Any little shock could push her right over the edge. Go get yourself someone more down to earth. Have a nice roll in the hay. Then you can talk to me about nasty styes. No, darling, I'm not mad at you. But I must say you're an awful prig sometimes. Just like your dad. The flesh, he'd say. You'd think it was dog dirt. You can excuse that in a young person. They are always so intolerant. But in someone his age, it was getting, well, very hard to live with. And that's the understatement of the year. Some days I think it would have been better for both of us if you hadn't been an only child. But you realize who you have to thank for that. You have no idea what I used to put up with. And every time I felt like a little, just to warm up my aging bones, it was like I'd suggested murder. Oh, you think what? You think Claudius murdered your dad? Well, no wonder you've been so rude to him at the dinner table. If I'd known that, I could have put you straight in no time flat. It wasn't Claudius, darling. It was me. I sometimes like to write short pieces based on forms that are not considered literary. And this is a short piece based on a form that is not considered literary, namely hunting and fishing magazines. It's called Stump Hunting. 1. Dead stumps are the favorite disguises of wild animals. How often have you been roaring past in your motorboat or paddling in your canoe when you've seen a dead stump sticking out of the water and said to yourself, "That looks like an animal." Just the head, of course, swimming. And then when you came up to it, it was only a dead stump. Don't be deceived. Usually these objects really are animals. Here's what you do. Shoot the animal more or less between the eyes, or where you guess the eyes must be. This will kill the animal, but will not cause it to shed its disguise. The next task is getting the animal out of the water. This can be difficult, as the animal will still be holding on tenaciously with the parts of itself that look like roots. You may need a chainsaw, a lot of rope, and a powerful motor on your boat. When you have at last managed to chop and pry the animal loose, tow it to shore where you will have parked your car. No blood will be visible. Let the animal dry out a little. It will be doing a very good imitation of being waterlogged and heavy. Heave it onto the hood of your car or the roof of your van and rope it down securely. Drive it into the city. Other hunters with moose or bears or deer or even porcupines strapped to their own cars will shake their heads and laugh at you, but remember, the last laugh will be yours. When you get the animal home, butcher it in the backyard. Use the chainsaw again and a diagram of a cow. The animal will still look like wood, but don't be fooled. Wrap the steaks, ribs, and chops in freezer paper and put them in the freezer. If your wife questions what you are doing or makes disparaging remarks about your sanity, tell her to mind her own business. Conversely, quote from the Bible, "All flesh is grass." When you feel ready for a big meal of animal meat, take a steak from the freezer and heat up your charcoal or gas hibachi or your frying pan or grill. This is the moment at which the animal will be forced to reveal its true nature. Season the steak, we like a little barbecue sauce, and toss it onto the heat. If it remains wood, you've made a mistake. Bad luck. You've picked the one dead stump out of 1,000 that is not really an animal. Try again later. 2. The favorite disguise of fish is oval stones lying at the bottoms of streams. I was at a lovely dinner party here the other night, and somebody was complaining about something called PC, and I got this all explained to me, what it was, PC, and what he was upset about. So, although I do not see this person in the audience, I see Roger, who will testify to the truth of what I say. And I'm going to read this vicariously. I'm going to read this for Roger vicariously for this other person. You can report back to him. There was once. This is about storytelling. You're taking workshops in that. There was once a poor girl, as beautiful as she was good, who lived with her wicked stepmother in a house in the forest. Forest is passé. I mean, I've had it with all this wilderness stuff. It's not a right image of our society today. Let's have some urban for a change. There was once a poor girl, as beautiful as she was good, who lived with her wicked stepmother in a house in the suburbs. That's better, but I have to seriously query this word poor. But she was poor. Poor is relative. She lived in a house, didn't she? Yes. Then, socioeconomically speaking, she was not poor. But none of the money was hers. The whole point of the story is that the wicked stepmother makes her wear old clothes and sleep in the fireplace. Aha! They had a fireplace. With poor, let me tell you, there's no fireplace. Come down to the park, come down to the subway stations after dark, come down to where they sleep in cardboard boxes, and I'll show you poor. There was once a middle-class girl, as beautiful as she was good. Stop right there. I think we can cut the beautiful, don't you? Women these days have to deal with too many intimidating physical role models as it is. What with those bimbos in the ads? Can't you make her, well, more average? There was once a girl who was a little overweight, and his front teeth stuck out, who, I don't think it's nice to make fun of people's appearances. Plus, you're encouraging anorexia. I wasn't making fun. I was just describing, skip the description. Description oppresses. But you can say what color she was. What color? You know, black, white, red, brown, yellow. Those are the choices. And I'm telling you right now, I've had enough of white. Dominant culture this, dominant culture that. I don't know what color. Well, it would probably be your color, wouldn't it? But this isn't about me. It's about this girl. Everything is about you. Sounds to me like you don't want to hear this story at all. Oh, well, go on. You could make her ethnic. That might help. There was once a girl of indeterminate descent. As average-looking as she was good, who lived with her wicked, another thing, good and wicked. Don't you think you should transcend those puritanical, judgmental, moralistic epithets? I mean, so much of that is conditioning, isn't it? There was once a girl as average-looking as she was well-adjusted, who lived with her stepmother, who was not a very open and loving person, because she herself had been abused in childhood. Better. But I am so tired of negative female images. And stepmothers, they always get it in the neck. Change it to stepfather, why don't you? That would make more sense anyway, considering the bad behavior you're about to describe. And throw in some whips and change. We all know what those twisted, repressed, middle-aged men are like. Hey, just a minute. I'm a middle-aged... Stuff it, Mr. Nosy Parker. Nobody asked you to stick in your oar, or whatever you want to call that thing. This is between the two of us. Go on. There was once a girl. How old was she? I don't know. She was young. This ends with a marriage, right? Well, not to blow the plot, but yes. Then you can scratch the condescending paternalistic terminology. It's woman, pal. Woman. There was once... What's this was once? Enough of the dead past. Tell me about now. There... So? So what? So why not here? I'm going to read one called The Page. This is for all of the writers. The page waits, pretending to be blank. Is that its appeal, its blankness? What else is this smooth and white, this terrifyingly innocent? A snowfall, a glacier. It's a desert, totally arid, without life. But people venture into such places. Why? To see how much they can endure, how much dry light. I've said the page is white, and it is. White as wedding dresses, rare whales, seagulls, angels, ice, and death. Some say that like sunlight it contains all colors. Others that it's white because it's hot. It will burn out your optic nerves. That those who stare at the page too long go blind. The page itself has no dimensions and no directions. There's no up or down except what you yourself mark. There's no thickness and weight but those you put there. North and south do not exist unless you are certain of them. The page is without vistas and without sounds, without centers or edges. Because of this, you can become lost in it forever. Have you never seen the look of gratitude, the look of joy on the faces of those who have managed to return from the page? Despite their faintness, their loss of blood, they fall on their knees, they push their hands into the earth, they clasp the bodies of those they love, or in a pinch, any bodies they can get, with an urgency unknown to those who have never experienced the full horror of a journey into the page. If you decide to enter the page, take a knife and some matches and something that will float. Take something you can hold on to and a prism to split the light and a talisman that works, which should be hung on a chain around your neck. That's for getting back. It doesn't matter what kind of shoes, but your hands should be bare. You should never go into the page with gloves on. Such decisions, needless to say, should not be made lightly. There are those, of course, who enter the page without deciding, without meaning to. Some of these have charmed lives and no difficulty, but most never make it out at all. For them, the page appears as a well, a lovely pool, in which they catch sight of a face, their own, but better. These unfortunates do not jump, rather they fall, and the page closes over their heads without a sound, without a seam, and is immediately as whole and empty, as glassy, as enticing as before. The question about the page is, what is beneath it? It seems to have only two dimensions. You can pick it up and turn it over, and the back is the same as the front. Nothing, you say, disappointed. But you were looking in the wrong place. You were looking on the back instead of beneath. Beneath the page is another story. Beneath the page is a story. Beneath the page is everything that has ever happened, most of which you would rather not hear about. The page is not a pool, but a skin. A skin is there to hold in, and it can feel you touching it. Did you really think it would just lie there and do nothing? Touch the page at your peril. It is you who are blank and innocent, not the page. Nevertheless, you want to know nothing will stop you. You touch the page. It's as if you've drawn a knife across it. The page has been hurt now. A sinuous wound opens, a thin incision. Darkness wells through. And the last thing I'll read is a short piece from The Blind Assassin in which an 82-year-old woman is writing. This is again for the writers. She is finally going to write. She actually doesn't know exactly what she's going to write. She's just beginning at this point. But she's probably going to write a number of things that she's never talked to anybody about and has never written down. And here is what she does. Yesterday I went to the doctor to see about these dizzy spells. He told me that I have developed what used to be called a heart, as if healthy people didn't have one. It seems I will not, after all, keep on living forever, merely getting smaller and grayer and dustier, like the Sibyl in her bottle. Having long ago whispered, I want to die, I now realize that this wish will indeed be fulfilled, and sooner rather than later. No matter that I've changed my mind about it. I've wrapped myself in a shawl in order to sit outside, sheltered by the overhang of the back porch at a scarred wooden table I had Walter bring in from the garage. It held the usual things, leftovers from previous owners, a collection of dried-out paint cans, a stack of asphalt shingles, a jar half filled with rusty nails, a coil of picture wire, mummified sparrows, mouse nests of mattress stuffing. Walter washed it off with Javex, but it still smells of mice. Laid out in front of me are a cup of tea, an apple cut into quarters, and a pad of paper with blue lines on it, like men's pajamas once. I've bought a new pen as well, a cheap one, black plastic with a rolling tip. I remember my first fountain pen, how sleek it felt, how blue the ink made my fingers. It was Bakelite with silver trim. The year was 1929. I was 13. Laura borrowed this pen without asking, as she borrowed everything, then broke it effortlessly. I forgave her, of course. I always did. I had to, because there were only the two of us. The two of us on our thorn-encircled island, waiting for rescue, and on the mainland, everyone else. For whom am I writing this? For myself? I think not. I have no picture of myself reading it over at a later time having become problematical. For some stranger in the future after I'm dead, I have no such ambition or no such hope. Perhaps I write for no one. Perhaps for the same reason children are writing for when they scrawl their names in the snow. I'm not as swift as I was. My fingers are stiff and clumsy. The pen wavers and rambles. It takes me a long time to form the words. And yet I persist, hunched over as if sewing by moonlight.
We're listening to Margaret Atwood at the 2002 Writers' Conference, live from the Duke Lecture Hall at Southampton College. We're at the question and answer period right now, and Margaret Atwood.
So we get to have a question and answer, and you get to do the questions, and I get to do the answers. We could do it the other way around. I could say, "Why are you here?" And then we would hear lots of stories. So if you have a question, now is the time.
I just heard you write about a woman hunched over, sewing as if she was in the moonlight. How do you feel when you write something that is just so right? How does it just jump at you more than the rest of the paragraph?
Well, no. How do I feel? Sometimes you write things you think are pretty good, and they don't fit. They don't fit where you've put them. And then, ultimately, you have to take them out. I don't throw those things out, because my parents went through the Depression, and they saved string. They also saved rubber bands and pieces of tinfoil and just all sorts of things. Like you weren't supposed to throw things out, so I don't throw them out. I put them in a drawer. And sometime or other, you may find that you can reach into that drawer, and in there will be something you need right then. But if they don't fit the place where you put them in the book that you're writing, then out they must come. They must come out. They may not be in the voice of the person who's speaking. They may not be suitable for that moment in the book. So you can have some very good things, and you think, wow, this is fabulous, and then you think it doesn't fit. That particular passage that I just read, we will hope it sounded effortless, but I'm a reviser, and that's about the 6th try at it. Rearranging, arranging, taking. Yes. It's
hesitant to even ask this at all, but it really isn't a question. It's just to make someone go from laughing to crying is a really phenomenal thing, and I know the process of revising, and I know the painful process of revising very well. It's really a thank you, I guess. I don't know what else it is. Not a question.
Thank you very much.
That's all.
You mentioned earlier that you're not the person who wrote the book. Is that difficult for you to go back into that drawer 5, 10, however many years later and pick out a character or a scene or something that you've written to put into a book that you're writing now?
It's not difficult because anything that you are writing now, you're bringing those things into the now. Just as, I mean, my text would probably be Krapp's Last Tape, that play by Beckett, in which it's just one character and a tape recorder. And we hear him recording some of his life into the tape recorder, a certain incident, and then we hear him some years later. That tape recording that he made in the past, in the time that is now the past, he is brought into the present, but he has a different relationship with it. And that is the play. By the end of it, you're practically flat on the floor. So it's not a question of when you wrote it. It's a question of what it's doing in your life now. Now, possibly it doesn't belong in your life now, and then you put it back in the drawer, but you have the same relationship with your family photograph album, if supposing there is one. You had a different relationship to those pictures of yourself as a baby when you were 10 than you did when you were 20, and then you will have when you're 70. Because you have changed. The picture is the same picture, but what you see in it is different. And the seeing in it, the seeing into it is happening in the now, in now time. It's the same thing. It's not how long ago it was, it's what are you doing with it in your life now. Every person who writes historical fiction goes through this process. Yes?
I was curious to hear you talk about the revision process because you're so prolific and you're writing. Thank you. Appears to be so stream of consciousness, and what I really wanted to ask about is your first draft process. I was just so curious when you said that you had revised this so many times. You know, how do you go about the first draft?
My first drafts are horrible. There's no other way of describing them. And they aren't even first drafts because I don't write one first draft all the way through before I start revising. It's more like a kind of roller coaster process. I never learned to touch type for reasons that have to do with the fact that I foolishly took home economics. Instead of, well, who knew? I didn't know I was going to be a writer. It was the days of home economics, and the detail you'll read in Negotiating with the Dead that I was our high school's entrant in the Consumers Gas Miss Homemakers contest. I didn't win, but I got a very nice Dingle Bell bracelet out of it. What did we have to do? We had to cook a gas meatloaf. We had to iron a shirt with a gas iron and some other gas thing we had to do. The meatloaf, the green peas, and the baked potato. I remember them well. Anyway, so I know all of those things, but I never, therefore, learned to touch type because the people who went into secretarial sciences were terrifying to me. They wore their boyfriends' black leather jackets and had very thin eyebrows, and they smoked in the washroom. And I was underage. I mean, I wasn't a child bride, but I was a child high school student. I shouldn't have been there. Anyway, that's old history. What it amounts to is that I can't type. So I write in handwriting, and then someone heard my prayers and invented computers. Because before then, I had to do it on a typewriter, and I made lots of mistakes. And we all know what those led to. They led to the little white bottle with the brush, and the little strips that you typed the sentence on, and then painstakingly glued it over the top of the line. Well, that is all gone now. Now we have the green and red squiggly lines. And I get on much better with them. And with the little man who waves at me from time to time. no reason that I've ever been able to figure out. I don't know what it is that I do that causes him to appear. It's nice to have company. So I transcribed my handwriting, which is very bad handwriting. It's another thing I never learned to do. I was never good at making all of the A's the same size as we wrote with our scratchy little steel pens and our blue blobby bottles of ink. I'm very old. So, no, I draw, this sounds very crazy. I draw pictures. And I draw diagrams, and sometimes I draw maps of rooms, and sometimes I draw pieces of furniture. But when I go into a book, I have no outline. I tried having an outline once. I thought I would be methodical and do things the way you were supposed to do it. And I made a filing card system. And each character had a filing card with a symbol on it showing that it was that character's card. And there are going to be 8 characters in this book, and the book was going to have 5 sections, and therefore there are going to be 40 chapters. Don't laugh that way. So I made the filing cards, and I felt I was very virtuous. And then I started writing the book, and I got to about page 200, and I'd only been twice through the filing cards, so sections 1 and 2, and nothing had happened. No events had yet taken place. I had lots of description of these people. I knew all about what they had in their cupboards and what sorts of shoes they had and what they had for breakfast. I knew everything about them, but they hadn't done anything. And I couldn't figure out what their relation was to one another, what they were doing in each other's lives. So that was the wrong way for me to write a book. And the only way that I can do it is stumbling around in the dark, starting with something in my handwriting which is bad, and nobody else can read it, so it's no point saying, why don't you get somebody to type this for you? So then I type it out and I read that. I have to print it out. I read it. And then I see whether I can go on from there or not. And that's how it goes. But it is a lot of revision and a lot of taking the wrong path. Have you ever been in a maze or even had those books of mazes that you had as a kid where you're supposed to follow through the one clear path to get to the thing in the middle? Well, that's what it's like, because you go down you take the wrong turn. Then you have to turn around and come back, retrace your steps to the last place where you knew where you were. You can get lost in your own text quite easily. You can go off on tangents. You can find sometimes wonderful discoveries. You find things you didn't know were going to be in the book. Or a different character. You had no idea. And suddenly here is this completely new person. And sometimes these old people who are already in the book have to go. They have to leave. This book I started 3 times. First time the old lady was dead. Other people were discovering her through her hat box, which she had left with things in it. And that didn't work. Threw it out. Away went the hat box. Second time I started it, she was alive, but she was in the 3rd person. Other people were discovering her through this time a suitcase. You see, the hat box got bigger. What was in the hat box were some letters. What was in the suitcase was a photograph album. That only lasted a couple of weeks. So away that went, although a photograph stayed. And then finally the character began speaking for herself, and that was the only way that I could continue with the book. The hat box and the suitcase became the steamer trunk that you will now find in the book. And everything that is in the steamer trunk is there now, to this very day, by which you know that I've told you the truth. Okay, maybe one more.
Hi. I'm glad I have it. Oh, God. Excuse me. I will add I have at least one thing in common with you. Only in Ireland we call it domestic science. But and I also hate that little man who can help because it makes me feel inadequate before I begin.
Oh, you should feel that he's cheering you on.
I'll think of it that way. I was also very glad of the idea of a knapsack of ideas to pull things in and out of, because my husband will hate you because I save too much as it is. But my question really is, and this applies I guess more to poetry, do you not feel that there's a flow and a sound? And if you start doing this patchwork thing of putting things in and out, do you ever find, even with your experience, that it's like a house of cards?
Flow is wonderful, if you can get it.
Nice work if you can get it?
Yeah. I usually only do that moving around after well, of course, you need to write the things that you then move around. And obviously you're not doing cut and paste when you're actually writing. You can write quite a lot and find that only some of it then turns into something you want to have or save. And I don't save everything. I throw out too. Some things are just too horrible. I throw them out. Though I notice in going through my old papers that I've probably it was probably a mistake to save that story I wrote when I was 17, in which the girl ends up by strangling her hamster. I think I'm going to get rid of that pretty soon.
Okay.
So I don't save everything, and of course you want to be able to write, and if you can, you stay with that toboggan ride as long as you can.
Yeah.
But then the sun sets, midnight chimes, you fall over, and a new day dawns. And then you actually have to read what you wrote the day before.
Thank you.
And I think that should be the last question, and I will say thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.